Have you ever taken a family trip to a labyrinth of a hotel located in isolated snow covered mountains for months on end until the spirits of the hotel finally drove you to the brink of insanity and convinced you to rid yourself of your wife and child? The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick, is a fairly loose adaptation of Stephen King's novel with the same name. While King's original work was more about how addiction, specifically alcoholism, could act as an agent of corruption for good, caring people, Kubrick decides to go his own direction with the narrative. He instead takes a villain and makes him a monster. With a truly committed performance from Jack Nicholson, Mr. Torrance is a very real, very scary villain to contrast Shelley Duvall's Wendy and Danny Lloyd's Danny. Instead of being a film about personal corruption, it focuses more on patterns of abuse and an overall cycle of trauma, but more on that later. My first exposure to the film was actually through Ready Player One, and, well, let's just say it set up interesting expectations. I remember seeing it for the first time during Freedom's 31 Days of Halloween special with extra behind the scenes photo and trivia, so really, with commercials, instead of sitting through an actual 2 hour and 26 minutes, it was more almost 3.5 hours, but I never really minded it. In fact, I probably couldn't think of a time I was so locked into one thing for such an extended period of time. Little would I know that that specific late night showing would dictate the experience that would solidify my favorite film of all time to this point. The atmosphere of the film is among the most immersive I've ever seen or even felt. The subtle score and icy harshness of the winter storm engulfs the viewer with an eeriness in the same way that the family themselves are trapped in the hotel. Another striking feature the film has is its melting pot of symbolism and themes. So many wild and wacky takes can be made from this film, and I love the ambiguity and mystery that Kubrick maintains to give those theories life. You could watch this film multiple times with a different lens each sitting and never get bored. That's no small feat. This film never ceases to be interesting or thought-provoking, and I think that's something special. So now, without further ado, let's have a full glance into Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. We begin with beautiful sweeping shots of the Colorado mountainscape as Jack Torrance makes his way toward the infamous Overlook Hotel. He is interviewing for the caretaker job for the hotel season, where the larger-than-life resort closes its doors and shuts down operations in an effort to rebuild his life after losing his teaching position. The hotel manager, Mr. Stuart Ullman, warns Jack that he and his family will be snowbound through most of the winter, and, of course, of the potential risk for cabin fever. He drives the point home by recounting a season when a previous caretaker named Charles Grady went crazy and brutally corrected his wife, 2 girls, and then himself. Given his own desperation and opportunity to pursue his own true passion of writing, Jack acknowledges the warning and accepts the job. Meanwhile, at the Torrance residence, Jack's son Danny is having a conversation with his mother Wendy about the move. When she asks if Danny is excited about the new situation, another voice answers.
No, I ain't Mr. Torrance. Now, come on, Tony, don't be silly. I don't want to call them Mrs. Torrance.
Later in the bathroom, Danny is talking with his imaginary friend Tony through his finger. Tony seems to have worries about the hotel, which Danny learns more about after some prying when Tony reluctantly reveals why he's so scared. After learning that darker part of the Torrance's past, we see the family make their way to the hotel. having a very strange conversation involving the Donner Party.
You mean they ate each other up?
They had to, in order to survive.
Jack. Don't worry, Mom. I know all about cannibalism. I saw it on TV.
See? It's okay. We saw it on the television.
After arriving, Ullman gives the Torrances a tour of the hotel and its many exquisite features. Tracking shots follow the group, focusing on the scale of each section of the hotel. It really adds to the grandiose of its character, making it feel like walking through an entirely new realm. Head chef Dick Halloran takes Wendy and Danny through the fully stocked kitchen. He seems innocent enough until...
Molasses, we got 60 boxes of dried milk, 30 12-pound bags of sugar.
How'd you like some ice cream, Doc?
The sociable.
After Ullman and Jack meet up with the group in the kitchen, Dick is left with Danny. Here we get more of an explanation to the strangeness that's shared between these two. He explains that he and his grandmother both had a gift. She referred to this communication as shining. Dick finds out that Tony himself is a manifestation of the shining within Danny, and asked about the extent to which his parents know about Tony's true nature, to which Danny replies,
No, Tony told me never to tell him.
Dick also counsels Danny about the hotel, hinting that something terrible had happened there and left a trace of itself, which only people who can shine will perceive. Danny questions Dick about what went on in the hotel, and especially about room 237. He knows that Dick is especially afraid of that room, as he can sense it through his shine. Though he strives to assure Danny that the images he sees in the hotel are just like pictures in a book and can't actually harm him. As some time goes on, Jack's mental health deteriorates rapidly once the family is alone and settled in the hotel. He's having extreme writer's block, is sleeping too little, and is very irritable. While the weather is still relatively warm, Wendy and Danny walk through a maze of tall hedges, making a sort of game out of it, stopping at dead ends and fixing their mistakes on the way. As this happens, we see Jack kind of, doing this. Whatever this is. Another day, while playing, a ball rolls towards Danny, and it appears to have come from the open door of room 237. Though Danny enters, we don't see inside just yet. At that same moment, Wendy comes running from the basement at the sound of Jack's screams in the lounge. He tells her that he had had a nightmare in which he had used an axe to correct Danny and her to pieces. As if the vibes weren't chaotic enough, Danny appears at the other end of the room, slowly making his way over to his parents and sucking his thumb. He does not answer when Wendy asks what happened. As she approaches him, she discovers that his sweater is ripped and there are bruises on his neck. She angrily accuses Jack of hurting Danny and takes the child back to their suite, leaving Jack in shock. Probably partially to not having any idea what happened to Danny, but probably also out of surprise of Wendy's sudden agency. Jack is furious about the accusation from Wendy and storms around the hotel before he eventually finds his way to the gold ballroom. He sinks defeatedly into a stool at the empty bar, his head in his hands, and claiming that he would sell his soul for just one drink. When he looks up, he discovers a bartender, who then serves him said drink. Jack is not confused by the sudden appearance of the bartender and even addresses him by his name, Lloyd.
I'm awfully glad you asked me that, Lloyd, because I just happen to have 2 20s and 2 10s right here in my wallet.
In the course of telling his troubles to Lloyd, Jack reveals that he had unintentionally dislocated Danny's shoulder, the same accident Wendy had mentioned earlier to the pediatrician. Notably, Jack states that the injury happened 3 years ago, while Wendy, when explaining the exact same story to the pediatrician, had said that he'd vowed quitting drinking following the accident, which had happened only 5 months ago. A frantic Wendy enters, finding Jack seemingly alone at the bar. She pleads with him to investigate Danny's claim that a crazy woman had attacked them in the bathtub of room 237. Jack, who acts a bit tipsy, grudgingly agrees to go and have a look. As Dak approaches the door to room 237, Danny appears to be having another seizure in his own room. Dick, back at home in Florida, stares wide-eyed as he picks up the signal that Danny is sending. Jack cautiously enters room 237. The bedroom is empty. He proceeds to the bathroom. He watches lustfully as a young, naked woman pulls back the shower curtain and steps slowly out of the bathtub. The two approach each other and embrace in a passionate kiss. Jack only catches a glimpse of the reflection in the mirror and sees that the woman is actually a rotting corpse, leading him to recoil in horror. When he reports back to Wendy, he denies anything's ever happened in room 237. Wendy suggests they leave the resort to take Danny to a doctor, which irritates Jack, leading him to lecture Wendy on her thoughtlessness and blaming her for everything that's gone wrong in his life. He insists that they can't leave the hotel because of his obligation to his employers. He then storms out, returning back to the Gold Room. Now at the Gold Room, there is an extravagant party with guests dressed in 1920s fashion. Lloyd serves him a drink, and Jack strolls through the crowd, enjoying life. He doesn't get far when a butler carrying a tray runs into him, spilling advocat on his jacket. The butler convinces Jack to come into the bathroom to clean up. The butler introduces himself as Delbert Grady. Jack remembers that last name, leading him to think about the story Mr. Ullman had told him. He then confronts Grady with the information, which Grady denies and says that nothing of the sort took place. Furthermore, he insists that Jack has always been the caretaker of the hotel. Grady goes on to tell Jack that Danny has a great talent and is using it to bring an outside party into the situation, referring to Dick Halloran with a racial slur. Grady advises Jack on how to correct Danny and how to deal with Wendy if she interferes. Back in Florida, Dick has had no luck contacting Wendy or anyone else at the Overlook Hotel. Worried about Danny, he books the next flight to Colorado. At the Overlook, Wendy arms herself with a baseball bat and looks for Jack, intent on leaving the hotel with Danny whether or not Jack agrees to go. Entering the lounge, she spots Jack's manuscript left unattended next to the typewriter that he's been abusing all film long. She reads what Jack has been writing. Hundreds of pages of repetitions of the single sentence. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. It's at this moment she realizes that Jack has gone mad. Jack suddenly approaches from behind and asks sarcastically,
How do you like it?
Wendy shrieks with alarm and wheels around to face him. A confrontation ensues as Jack demands to know her intentions regarding leaving the hotel with Danny, while Wendy retreats, brandishing the bat. She screams at Jack not to hurt her, and he swears that he will not. Instead, he intends to kill her. Wendy hits Jack on the head with the bat at the top of this flight of stairs, causing him to lose his balance and tumble down the staircase, injuring his ankle in the process. Wendy drags Jack's limp body to the pantry and locks him inside just as he regains consciousness. The gaslighting son of a bitch then tries to convince her to let him out.
Wendy, baby, I think you hurt my head real bad. I'm dizzy. I need a doctor.
When that obviously doesn't work, he starts laughing, toying with her. He tells her that he has sabotaged the radio as well as the snowcat, stranding them all there. She goes outside to check and confirms what he had told her. A few hours later, Jack is woken by the sound of Delbert Grady's voice. Grady expresses a disappointment and lack of confidence in Jack.
The moment, Mr. Grady. Only for the moment.
Then, the pantry door opens, suddenly unlocking. Wendy has fallen asleep in her room. Danny is in a trance, carrying a knife and muttering red rum repeatedly. He takes Wendy's lipstick and writes it on the bathroom door. then begins shouting, which then wakes Wendy. She clutches him to her. Then, seeing the reflection in the mirror, at that instant, banging sounds start coming from the door to the hallway. The sound is Jack swinging an axe at the locked door. Wendy grabs Danny and locks them in the bathroom. She opens a tiny snow-banked window and pushes Danny out. He slides safely to the ground. Meanwhile, Jack has chopped his way through the front door and calls out. He then knocks politely on the bathroom door as she's on the other side holding a knife and tries to steady herself as Jack then begins to chop down the door. After chopping away one of the panels, he sticks his head through and iconically screams.
Here's Johnny!
Jack then sticks his hand through the door to try to turn the lock, which then is met with a slash from Wendy with the knife. Jack continues to hack at the door until they both hear the low rumble of an approaching Snowcat engine. The Snowcat driver is Dick, finally making his way to the hotel after quite an extended period of journeying and traveling and trying to set up rides. Inside the hotel, he calls out but gets no reply. He continues to walk until he's met with Jack hiding behind a pillar, leaping out and swinging the axe into his chest, killing him. Danny, hiding in a kitchen cabinet, screams, revealing his location. Meanwhile, Wendy has ventured from the bathroom and begun to search for Danny. The hotel is sprung to life, and now even Wendy encounters ghosts, sights that shock and horrify her. At the same time, axe-wielding Jack turns on the outdoor lights and follows Danny into the hedge maze. After a while of running through the maze, Danny realizes that he's leaving a trail of footprints in the snow for Jack to follow. He carefully begins to retrace his steps, walking backwards in the same prints he'd created in the opposite direction. He then covers the rest of the tracks and hides behind a hedge. When Jack arrives, he sees that the trail of footprints ends abruptly, giving him no clue as to which direction Danny is taken. He chooses a path and lurches deeper into the maze, leaving Danny to come out of his hiding spot and follow his own footprints back to the maze's entrance. Wendy makes her way out of the hotel just as Danny emerges from the maze. Relieved, she flings down the knife and embraces him. Jack bellows his frustration from within the maze. Danny and Wendy waste no time escaping in the snowcat that Dick used to get to the hotel. Jack, hopelessly lost in the maze, ends up freezing to death. Right before the end credits, the camera slowly zooms in on a wall in the hotel full of old photographs that chronicle the hotel's history. In the center of one picture is a young Jack, the caption reading, Overlook Hotel, July 4th Ball, 1921. So, what is there to gather from Stanley Kubrick's The Shining? Firstly, I want to discuss themes. There are a number of significant themes prevalent in The Shining. For instance, the motif of alcohol/substance abuse being a tool used to exacerbate acts of violence and aggression. In the film, Jack always has a decently cold manner to his demeanor. However, it isn't until he takes that first drink at Lloyd's bar where Jack's behavior becomes more outwardly evil. He cheats on Wendy with that spooky, naked ghost lady. He goes from pushing Wendy away and distancing himself from her and their child to hunting them down like a bloodthirsty animal. He actively lies to both and gaslights his true, darker intentions.
Dad?
What?
You would never hurt Mom and me, would you?
What do you mean?
Then, to top it all off, it isn't until Jack mentally breaks down enough for him to break sobriety that the spirits of the hotel and its true nature are revealed to him. It's as if that need for a drink was the last straw keeping him from a somewhat normal, albeit cold, life. While I adore King's portrayal of a good person being corrupted by substance abuse, I find Kubrick's cynical approach to be very engaging for an adaptation. The idea of Jack being a haunting and intimidating figure even before the influence of the Overlook's ghosts makes him that much scarier to me. It's as if Jack always had that darkness within him, but the environment he puts himself in just works to amplify his pre-existing evilness rather than morph him into that characteristic. This idea arises with the conversation he has with Grady in the bathroom at the Gold Ballroom, specifically drawing attention to when Grady says, "You've always been the caretaker," kind of saying to Jack in a subtle way that you've always had this monster in you. You've always been the caretaker of the Overlook. You've always had the potential the spirits have been looking for and feeding off of. This leads me to my second point of interest, the cycle of trauma. The film maintains a triad throughout its story, a guideline through which to interpret characters' motivations through the symbolism of their trauma. Kubrick manifests his message through dissecting trauma as a point of weakness, defense mechanism, and awareness. We can look back at Nicholson's Jack to examine the first guideline. Jack's trauma stems from three very grounded scenarios: his alcoholism, losing his job, and hurting his own kid. Unlike others, Jack's trauma doesn't result in him shining, at least not overtly. However, it does still play into Kubrick's overall narrative. These events are what ultimately leave Jack susceptible to the evils of the Overlook. Jack walks into the Overlook with an incredible amount of burdens on his shoulder. He is unemployed, thus placing stress on him to be a good caretaker for the hotel in order to keep them from going broke. He wishes to be a writer, but the quiet of the Overlook only drives him to insanity as he already is wrestling with writer's block. And he's longing to have a drink, and clearly the urge has impacted him mentally enough, possibly leading him to think that his sobriety was longer than it may have actually been. All of this mental trauma, on top of his natural aggression, just made him the perfect target for the Overlook and its spirits to weaponize. Danny's trauma begins with the night Jack physically abused him in a fit of drunken rage. Although it is not explicitly mentioned in the film, the ability that is shining typically can be found throughout the entire Stephen King universe in characters that have experienced some form of physical or emotional trauma. That experience usually works to awaken or at least amplify the shine within them, opening their minds to another plane of existence and providing them the ability to access the supernatural. It allows people to see events, past or future, and use their abilities to connect to and help others. This will be an important note for later. Since Danny has the shine, we can assume that that traumatic experience played a role in its development. This would align with how Wendy talks about Tony in his first quote-unquote appearance after the accident that dislocated the boy's shoulder. Tony's role is then that of a trauma response. Trauma response often is associated with reflexive reactions for stressful and even dangerous stimuli, sort of like a fight or flight response. The scenes of Tony and flashing images to Danny is the exact sort of behavior. Tony is Danny, warning himself of danger and heightening his attention to certain stimuli. He is protecting himself, though as a kid, Danny wouldn't realize that. This then leaves Dick Hallorann. Again, while not stated in this film, Dick himself does have a past history of being abused. As a matter of fact, it was brought up in a scene between Danny and Dick in Mike Flanagan's sequel to this film, Dr. Sleep, from 2019.
My grandfather, he was a mean son of a bitch. Dark inside. Same type of dark as your dad. Beat me senseless, and my grandma too, and when he died, I danced. But he kept on coming back.
So acknowledging that Dick's shining does indeed come from his own experience with traumatic events in his life, we can further analyze how that experience influences his motivations within this film. Kubrick finalizes his triad with the Odyssey of one Dick Hallorann. Dick's role throughout the film is a very disappointing one. He's traveling throughout half the film just to ultimately die moments after trying to save Danny and Wendy. It is a devastatingly mute arc for his character, especially since he lives in the novel. I believe there is another significance for his character, and that stems from his shine being used as a source of personal connection. He explains how that ability to shine, aka shared trauma, was what allowed them to speak without opening their mouths. It established a new level of understanding between the two that is deeper than most could obtain. He can easily detect Danny's shine and makes his own ability known very early on to the boy, which we can see as Dick intuitively knowing that Danny has suffered some great pain in the same way he has, and that makes him go out of his way to ensure the young kid has the tools to handle dealing with his own experiences. In that scene where he talks to Danny in the kitchen, we can reinterpret his words into being more directly about their shared trauma, and how it bonds them not only together, but to different aspects of life as well. He tells them they're only pictures in a book, and that his past trauma may cause some hurting, but only mentally. He's protected physically by his shine, his ability to connect with and confide in others who have gone through similarly traumatic events. Dick's main role, then, is that of connection. Someone who can help Danny navigate the pains from his past via his own experience with trauma. With Dick, Danny's not alone, and doesn't have to handle this trauma alone. Essentially, Kubrick crafts a spectrum through which the deep intricacies of human psychology can be observed and maintained via these three characters. And how do we know this? Well, to continue discussing the role that trauma plays in this narrative, we'll shift to the filmmaking elements, starting off with the score. The often discomforting score does more than bury you into the isolated and cold tone of the film. The dreadful sounds of Wendy Carlos' score acts as a sort of key to decoding certain scenes that might be more ambiguous than others. A cue used throughout the film I'd noticed while rewatching to write the script was a sharp, distinct ringing. The score actively ties into the thematic symbolism that's held throughout, by being an auditory interpretation of trauma. Just about every scene that ringing is in just so happens to be a scene relating to the shine, from Danny seeing the twins for the first time, to Dick making his shine known to Danny, to then Dick getting a message from Danny that danger is coming and that there's help needed at the hotel. That ring is more than some random ear-aching sound to act as a generic horror. It is itself connected to the trauma symbolism throughout the film, as we know that the shining power is directly connected to personal trauma. Kubrick fully fleshes out this world. Each detail within helps support and maintains others. That is the genius of this film. Secondly, we'll look at cinematography. I don't want to spend too much time on this as the video is getting long as is. However, I can't talk about this film and not mention the beautiful fucking shots. My god, Kubrick had something special. The way he creates scale in his film, forcing perspective on certain characters, is just incredible. The way he slowly tracks across and almost stalks the characters in the story as if we, the audience, are a spirit at the overlook. The quick zoom-ins that pull us into the film, making us physically uncomfortable with how close we are getting to the action of the events. Even the slowness Kubrick has the patience to explore gives an almost documentary feel to the events we witness, as if the evil we see displayed is just a matter of fact within the world. It is all just masterful. Finally, it is crucial to discuss the acting. It continues to baffle my mind that this film had such a notorious reputation for a while after it was initially released in 1980. From being a box office flop to getting 2 Razzie nominations, one going to Kubrick for directing and the other going to Shelley Duvall for her performance as Wendy, which is just the biggest load of BS I've ever seen. Shelley Duvall's Wendy is brought to life with her raw terror and sheer exhaustion. Was it necessary for Kubrick to mistreat her on set for this kind of performance? Not at all. But she did stick through and delivered such an emotionally striking character that I think some good did come out of it, and she deserves praise for that. There's no reason for Duvall to get so much hate when she essentially carries the film with quite possibly the best overall performance outside of potentially Nicholson's iconic horror antagonist. Speaking of, Nicholson's over-the-top, almost cartoony portrayal of a psychopath does wonders for the film. Anyone could play the role with dramatic realism and negatively juxtapose himself with the bizarre nature of the supernatural hotel. Or even go too far with the wackiness that it makes the film feel more like a joke, essentially killing the deeply emotional themes we discussed earlier. Only Nicholson, I feel, could hit that perfect spot of being absurdly crazy while also feeling legitimately terrifying. Like, could you imagine being trapped in a place with that man? Fuck that. In conclusion, the film is emphatically about trauma, how the evils of life particularly feed off of that trauma. That is no surprise, as King's always been a great writer when it came to fleshing out characters and their experiences as it related to emotions and mental states. Though these themes are significant to King and his style of writing, Kubrick's filmmaking is important to consider because he forces us to think about how those emotions, like trauma, can be explored throughout the platform of film. He makes us question what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like. The thing I love about Kubrick is his pursuit of ambiguity, especially in this film. That ambiguity leads to a number of possible messages that can be observed throughout. Is it a film about the dangers of toxic masculinity, working to dissect a toxically dysfunctional relationship until a divorce inevitably leaves the husband a cold and lonely tragedy? Is it a film about how embracing trauma lets you overcome your personal demons, while pushing aside loved ones only drives you further into madness? Is it a film that uses the supernatural as a metaphor for self-destructive tendencies like alcohol abuse, taking aim at how addiction corrupts people into delving into a mental spiral? Or is it simply a metaphor for Kubrick to express guilt for faking the moon landing? I'm not sure, but whatever the case, I love this film, and I love talking about it. So, if you've made it this far, thanks for listening. I hope it was enjoyable, more so than how being chased through a hedge maze by a psychopath with an axe in the dead of winter would be. So, what is The Shining? I'd say it's a masterpiece of a perplexing puzzle from the mastermind that was Stanley Kubrick.